Well, look who's back. As some of you may know, I recently spent the last year covering every Resident Evil game in what was supposed to be a short little project to celebrate the opening of my Patreon. And I gotta say, even though RE is still my life's blood, it's kinda nice to be covering a game that has a little less zombies and a lot more late 90s lighthearted fun. And speaking of the 90s, as anyone can tell you, this was the absolute best time to own a game console, specifically Sony's PlayStation. The PS1 was an absolute utopia for oddball risk-taking developers, and at the time, no one could match Squaresoft in a let's see who could come up with the weirdest game contest. Yep, it seems like 100 years ago, but there was once a time when this logo right here meant a guaranteed good time. Sure, they mostly dealt in RPGs at the time, but a real fan might remember a few shooters, and maybe even a fighting game thrown in the mix. So at the time, it wasn't totally out of the ordinary to see advertisements for a game that looked like a cross between Mario 64 and A Link to the Past. In fact, this game had my attention the very second I saw its logo on the demo disc that came with my copy of Parasite Eve. Well, it's been a full 20 years since Brave Fencer Musashi came out, and the biggest question is, can it still live up to not one, but 2 full decades of pure nostalgia? Well, I'm Jared, and this is Avalanche Reviews. Man, it feels good to say that again.
Hey, geezer! Wait, have we met?
I'm Livers, the butler.
Who cares about that? Why am I here?
Brave Fencer Musashi is the tale of, well, Musashi, a warrior called away from his world to defend the all-you-can-eat kingdom against the Thirst Quencher Empire, which I immediately have to call a red flag on, because in the story, Musashi is described as both the reincarnation of a brave warrior who defended the all-you-can-eat kingdom 150 years ago, and also a kid who lives in some other world. I mean, why was Musashi not reincarnated into the world he already existed in? Is there some deep multiverse lore going on here? No, it's a lot more likely I'm just reading into this way too much. But now that you've heard it twice, you've no doubt noticed what a weird name All You Can Eat is for a kingdom. And yes, the entire game has this same food-based naming scheme. Almost every character in the game is named after some food or drink, which at first I assumed was some kind of working designs tier act of taking liberties with Japanese translation. But nope, the Japanese version has the same exact approach.
ちょっと待ちなさいよ。さっきから黙って聞いてりゃ、私を未熟者みたいに。
I couldn't really say why this was the direction they went in, but I assume it had something to do with more than a few devs pitching ideas on an empty stomach. Either way, it's fun and just kind of fits the rest of the game's feel, which reminds me, we should probably get back on track here. Now, where were we again? Ah, yeah, that's right. So when the kingdom's in danger of being destroyed, Princess Filet performs a ritual that brings Musashi into their world, and he can't go back until he's finished his task, which is collecting a legendary sword called Lumina and 5 elemental scrolls in order to beat back the Thirst Quencher Empire. Well, a few things don't exactly go according to plan, and eventually we have ourselves a kidnapped princess to deal with as well. After this masterfully done story introduction, the game turns into a very familiar experience for Zelda fans, as Musashi continues trying to save the kingdom, but isn't opposed to running a few errands for local townspeople on the way. And I assume you know where the rest of this is going. Trials are overcome, shadowy villains are introduced, and dogs are saved. You know, boilerplate stuff. Which I have to say is actually really refreshing. Sure, the general setup is about as generic as they come, but where this game shines is how much character it has. Almost the entire cast have these amazingly interesting personalities, and the world is just bright and intriguing. Everything has a humorous tone, and even the bad guys are kind of likable.
One of them 5 scrolls is just over them there. Can't have you in my way.
What? There's a scroll nearby?
Ah, shoot! You found it out!
Which would have definitely fallen flat if it weren't held up by some really great voice acting. I mean, just listen to these lines. How can you not love this?
Take that back, you little turd!
Please, princess, so little turd, calmeth down.
And yeah, I know I sound like a hipster here, but trust me, I'm not ironically enjoying these voiceovers. Believe it or not, the late 90s was a great time for voice acting, and Brave Fencer Musashi definitely proves that. I really don't know what else to say other than this is a really great story. I know the setup may have your eyes rolling, but damn, this game is splitting at the seams. It's so packed full of charm and character. I really enjoyed the little conversations and the insane amount of effort put into making everyone equal parts likable and funny. Brave Fencer Musashi is a light in tone, hilarious tale that has more heart than any action RPG you're likely to have played. So if you were ever wondering what the bastard offspring of A Link to the Past and Samurai Pizza Cats would look like, well, here's your answer.
Hey, wait! What about the 5 scrolls? You know where they are, don't you? What? He left? What a weirdo.
Brave Fencer Musashi stands as a testament to its era and its creator. Around the time of the PlayStation, Squaresoft was known for making really great games, but also chock-ing them full of content, which makes this a hard game to nail down. I mean, sure, it's clearly cut from the same cloth as Zelda, and there's no way that was an accident, but there's much more to it than that. Just off the top of my head, I can think of elements from platformers, action RPGs, collectathons, Metroidvanias, and one very frustrating raft sailing simulator. But I feel like we might be getting ahead of ourselves here, so let's start with the surface level stuff. From the very start of the game, your goal is to find the scrolls needed to beat back the thirst quenchers, but like any self-respecting action RPG, you'll need to do a lot of grunt work before you can even hope to see one of those. The starting village acts as a hub for most of the game, and thanks to a pretty compact layout, you'll get pretty damn familiar with each building and its inhabitants. While the game can be very vague with telling you what you may need to do at any one time, you can bet it almost always comes down to talking to one of these villagers. And to be fair, you should probably be spending a good amount of time keeping up with these guys anyways, since there's some good info to be gleaned. Of course, they're not going to give anything up until you do them a favor, but I'm sure we're all used to that by now. These favors will take you through dungeons, forests, and caves, all packed with enemies, which leads us to the combat. While attacking, Square acts as your quick, weaker attack, and Triangle will use Lumina for a slower, higher damage dealing slash. As the game goes on, you'll learn combos and other skills, but even then, you aren't exactly going to be executing any high-level strats here. So in general, combat is relatively simple, and except for a wimpy range on your light attack, there isn't too much more to say. Or at least that would be the case if Square wouldn't have included about a million other mechanics. First off is your ability to mimic enemy attacks and movements by using fusion. Holding R1 will build a gauge in the lower left, and hitting square while it's full will send out your sword. If it lands, you need to mash square to refill that same bar, and after successfully wearing down the bones in your thumb, you'll be rewarded with a new skill that typically gets mapped to the circle button. These skills can range from projectiles to antidotes and a few twists on mobility. The entire game is essentially built around this one idea, and I gotta say it feels great. Each area you come across will have a problem that fusion will almost always be able to solve. Whether it's clearing a gap, breaking walls, or just getting rid of crappy status effects, a keen eye and some button mashing skills will likely get you out of every problem the game throws at you. The second and third mechanics go hand in hand, and that's exploration and progression. Nearly every area in the game seems pretty straightforward, but a few trips off the beaten path will prove that's definitely not the case. Scattered all over are Bincho fields holding kidnapped villagers, animals that can increase your max HP, and legendary pieces of armor that can change up your moveset. These spots are almost always worth the trip, and even though the environments are made in such a way that finding these hidden treasures isn't too difficult, you'll still feel like a genius when you stumble across one. Much like any self-respecting Metroidvania, skills like environmental attacks and double jumps open up new paths in areas you're already pretty familiar with. Most of the first hours of the game will be spent in the same few spots, so getting a new ability and coming back to find that the area is much bigger than you first thought is something that never gets old. Now, these elements alone would make for an immensely fun game, but we haven't even scratched the surface. There's also a day and night cycle that plays pretty heavily into progression. Some villagers will only be available at certain times, and the berries that increase your health can only be found in the mouths of animals who only come out at night. The good news is you have just a bit of control over when and where these shifts into nighttime take place. Hitting select will cycle through your charge modes, turning your collection of energy into one big yawn. While you're asleep, time passes very fast, and your HP also restores, but this isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card. As your HP is going up, your BP will start to go down, and when there's no more BP, you'll start losing health. This sleep mechanic comes in handy countless times, but if you just want the benefits and none of the downsides, you can just stay in the village inn or your own personal room in the castle. Now, I know this seems a bit overwhelming, but I feel like it does a good job of easing you in. The first area is a really well-made tutorial stage that'll mostly bring you up to speed.
Shoot! It's too far to jump! Hey, I know! I'll use gunshot to hit those logs
And an honestly massive amount of voice dialogue can probably lead you through the rest. But no matter what you do, don't let the super deformed look and bright kid-friendly appeal fool you. This game is packed with just as much content as it is challenge, which is a real plus in my book, and at the same time, there aren't any parts of the game that feel like they're padded or maybe lasted a little longer than they should. You're always going to be going somewhere to accomplish something, and you'll no doubt uncover a shit ton of collectibles along the way. All that being said, this is not what you would call a perfect gaming experience. Being the late 90s, Squaresoft wasn't exactly an expert at the whole full 3D world thing, and there are a few missteps that'll be pretty clear right off the bat. First on the chopping block are the controls, which can be a real pain in the ass sometimes, but also kind of hard to explain. I often had a hard time lining myself up to attack an enemy or to open a chest, and I think it's because of a lack of true 3D controls. Musashi is essentially given a full 8-way control scheme, but it's a bit too rigid and doesn't allow for small adjustments in between the 8 main directions. These bad controls can lead to a few cheap hits, but overall become less of an issue as you progress. What never stopped getting on my nerves was the movement speed, though. Now don't get me wrong, Musashi moves fast enough, but it's getting him to that speed where the issue lies. When you hit a direction, Musashi will start walking that way, and after a few seconds, he'll build momentum and run. A mechanic that typically isn't too bad on its own, but throw that in with platforming and small surfaces, and you've got yourself a rough time. The good news is the double jump takes care of this issue, but until you get that, the walk speed will have you taking way more damage than necessary. In any other game, these two flaws combined might have been enough to frustrate the hell out of me, but every time I died, I was more than happy to load up my last save and get back at it. It's so rewarding and enjoyable that spending a little more time playing it was never a negative for me. Brave Fencer Musashi makes for an incredible gameplay experience and one amazing first shot at this type of genre. There's an almost limitless amount of optional things to collect, some truly inspired puzzle solving, and pattern-centric boss fights that straddle the line between challenging and fun as hell to figure out. So if you're looking for a game that plays close enough to a Zelda title but offers the batshit insanity that comes with 90s era Squaresoft, well, you really only have one option, so what the hell are you waiting for?
What a loser! The ceiling's collapsed and he can't move! Geek!
For some reason, this generation's 3D graphics always get shit on, and I never understood why. I mean, sure, PlayStation games were so low poly, you could actually count the number of affine texture map triangles used in most characters, but at the same time, this was something to be marveled at. We all knew Square could cook up some great looking super deformed style designs on the Super Nintendo, so it was a no-brainer this same look would carry over to Sony's powerhouse console. Thanks to this, Brave Fencer Musashi has aged pretty gracefully in my opinion. I'm not sure why, but the more stylized looking games from this era always seem to fare much better than games that tried to go for more realism. But either way, this game still looks great, at least to my eyes. The use of mostly flat shaded polygons was still a common practice at this point, and for me, kind of defines the look of the PS1's special brand of 3D. But before we go any further, I should probably explain what the hell I'm talking about. In the early days of the PS1, there were basically two options when it came to making 3D models. You could either texture them, which makes for that familiar look used in games like Metal Gear Solid, or you could save some precious system resources by going with flat shaded polygons. These polygons only used a flat color for a texture and used the many shades of that color for added depth. This style is probably most popular for its appearance in Final Fantasy VII's simpler looking 3D models. Brave Fencer Musashi blends both of these approaches, and I think it makes for a really great look. Buildings and backgrounds are almost always textured, but most character models are flat shaded with just a few textures around for added coolness. The best example of this being Princess Filet, who's mostly made up of these flat shaded white shapes, but also uses some textures for little details on her dress. Now, I know me praising this style is insanely subjective. I mean, if you didn't grow up with this style of graphics, it's gonna be pretty hard to convince you that this was top of the line at one point. But one thing that can't be debated is the incredible 2D art on display here. Characters have truly amazing looking art during dialogue scenes, and Musashi's face used in the corner of the screen to display how tired he is about as charming as you can get. That being said, there are some downsides and a few oddities to consider. Most importantly of which is the fact that the game can slow down significantly when there's a lot going on screen, which can make the controls a lot harder to manage. Luckily, this doesn't happen too often in areas where platforming is required, and to be fair, it never really got on my nerves, it just kind of interested me. And speaking of interesting, I noticed a small anomaly that only happens in the dialogue boxes. For some reason, this blinking arrow causes a weird dithering effect on the 2D art. Could this be due to my FrameMeister, my component cables, or maybe one of the few artifacts that comes with the PS2's emulation of the PS1's processor? I honestly don't know. And if you're thinking that's an oddly obscure thing to mention, yeah, you're probably right. Listen, I don't know why my mind works this way, guys. I just have to get all this stuff out there. And lastly, I want to get into something specifically only for people planning on using the FrameMeister to upscale this game. You might have noticed throughout the video that the footage isn't as sharp as what can typically be achieved on the console, and that's thanks to me leaving the FrameMeister sharpness setting at 0. When I crank it up to 1, some 2D art like text looks razor sharp, but I noticed it also caused some ringing artifacts on other 2D assets. So if I were you, I'd leave the sharpness setting alone, at least on this game. On another completely unrelated note, at least as far as graphics are concerned, I also have to point out that this may be one of the absolute best video game soundtracks ever made. Seriously guys, this one deserves a spot right up there with Chrono Cross and Donkey Kong Country. Regardless of whether or not you end up playing the game, make sure you check out the music. I promise you won't regret it.
Miss Thirst Quencher? Don't you mean the contest for old hags? How dare you!
Well guys, it should be pretty clear by now, I am completely in love with this game, but let's check out the pros and cons to see if this is the 3D Zelda clone for you. I think you guys probably know I'm a fan of some dark realistic stories, but every now and then I enjoy a nice lighthearted tale that's as cute as it is entertaining. Stealing the abilities of the enemies around you is not only really fun as far as combat is concerned, but also a great method for setting up puzzles. I may be alone in thinking PS1 era voice acting is great, but at least we can all agree that this game has some awesome voice work in it. Even though Brave Fencer Musashi deals heavily in a very specific brand of PS1 graphics, I think the bright and colorful nature of the game's presentation makes it a universal looker. Weird controls and an odd perspective can often lead to a whole bunch of missed attacks. The short amount of time it takes to get to full speed may not seem like a big deal out in the open, but when you're trying to get Musashi to do a little platforming, this can be the cause of more than a few undeserved falls. Sometimes the game can get bogged down when there's too many things on screen, and these moments it's not uncommon to see the frame rate dip into the teens, and that still kinda sucks. Guys, I gotta say, this is an absolute must play. The bright, cheery, colorful attitude and look are just the thing a modern gamer might need to get out of the dull, serious games we've been inundated with so often. And as far as fun and the all-important feeling of accomplishment goes, Brave Fencer Musashi is in a league of its own, and I just can't recommend it enough. Sadly, it's been rising in price recently, and you'll often see it going for $45 complete, but as long as it stays under $50, I can assure you it is absolutely well worth it. And I think that's it for now, guys, but I will be back soon, so as usual, I'm Jared.
Musashi, just hurry up and bash this hunk of lard. Ugh.
Aw, shucks! Shut up, you dumb gal!
And this is Avalanche Reviews. Hey guys, thanks for sticking around, and thanks for coming back. I know everyone pretty much thinks I'm the Resident Evil guy now, but I gotta throw some love to that old PS1 Squaresoft era stuff too. If you like what I'm doing here, click that subscribe button, and maybe think about visiting my Patreon. If you want to see more videos like this, I have some playlists linked on here, so maybe check them out. Thanks guys, I'll see you later.